A clinical trial published in 2023 found that Moringa supplementation over 8 weeks in people with elevated cholesterol produced approximately an 11% reduction in LDL and about a 9% reduction in total cholesterol. So let's just say, for instance, that your cholesterol, your LDL cholesterol is 180. 11% is going to take that down significantly, right? About 18 points, 20 points, somewhere in that range. But what I like about this study and what encourages me about it is I'm not a big believer in these cholesterol numbers. I do believe that we need higher levels of HDL than most of us have, a better LDL to HDL ratio. But the thing that I love about this study is 11% reduction in LDL and a 9% reduction in total cholesterol. What that means is that the numbers, actually, the ratio improved. LDL was coming down, HDL would have been coming up a little bit in order for those numbers to make sense. 11% reduction in LDL, but only a 9% reduction in total cholesterol. That's what we want. We want a better cholesterol ratio. We're more concerned about that than we are the overall number. So this is one area where I'm going to say that, taking something that can help your cholesterol would actually be helping your health, not just lowering a number that many doctors are concerned about. Welcome to Vitality Radio, the podcast that helps you make sense of natural supplements and thrive without pharma drugs. I'm Jared St. Clair. I grew up in a health food store and spent over 40 years now figuring out what works and what doesn't, so that you can make confident, informed decisions about nutrition, supplements, and your health. All right, it's time for another Extraordinary Herbs episode. I've gotten a lot of really good feedback on these episodes. I hope that they are pleasing you, as well as they have some of the people that have told me they've really enjoyed them. Today's episode is on Moringa. Now, Moringa is an interesting one because I remember a time when I'd never heard of Moringa, and it wasn't that long ago. This is something that's got thousands of years of traditional use, but mostly didn't really get any kind of play in the United States until like the mid 2010s, something around there. So about the last 15 years or something like that, it's been here. But yeah, I remember the first customer that came in asking for it, and I was like, I've never even heard of it. Let me look into that. And that always gets me excited because it's always just another opportunity to learn more. But what I've learned about Moringa is that most people now, or a lot of people, have heard of it, but they don't really know much about it. And I think it gets categorized pretty much as a green food, which it kind of is, but it's a little different than that. It's a green food that's also an herbal tonic. Anyway, I'm really excited to share it with you. We're going to dig right into it. And I know there's some people that have probably been waiting for this one because they have been curious about Moringa. We have a lot of Moringa curious people that come in. It's been called the miracle tree and is a funny word, right? Miracle, because it sounds like it's a panacea or something like that. It's not. And when you hear something like miracle tree, skepticism is certainly warranted. But this is what I'm going to tell you. Moringa doesn't need miracle language. What it needs is an honest look at what it actually does and how to use it right, because there's a lot of confusion in this category. A lot of people, like I said, treating it like a greens powder, which is totally fine because it is very much a super micronutrient dense plant, but it also can be used as an herbal tonic. And that makes it different than something like barley grass or wheatgrass or spirulina or chlorella or that kind of thing. It really sits at its own interesting intersection. It's not primarily a stress herb the way that ashwagandha is. It's not really a hormonal herb. It lives at the crossroads of dense plant nutrition and genuine medicinal activity, including blood sugar support, inflammation, antioxidant defense, and cholesterol. And we're going to talk a little bit about cholesterol in a minute, because if you're a regular listener to this show, I don't put quite as much merit on the cholesterol conversation as maybe your doctor does. But what I'm going to share with you on cholesterol when it comes to Moringa, I think is actually pretty useful. So let's get into it. So the herb itself is known as Moringa oleifera. It's a fast growing tree, like really fast growing tree. These things grow to 30, 40 feet tall very, very quickly. And they thrive in harsh conditions with poor soil, low rainfall, etc. It's native to the foothills of the Himalayas and northwestern India. And it's been cultivated across South Asia, East Africa, and Central America. And now it grows on almost every continent. Every part of the tree has some use: the pods, the seeds, the flowers, and the bark, and even the root. But for supplemental purposes, we're almost always talking about the leaves. Dried moringa leaf is what you're getting in capsules and in powder and the stuff that you might be throwing in your smoothie. The seeds have cosmetic and topical applications, but the leaf is where the research is, and that's where what we're going to talk about today. Classification wise, moringa is what's known as a nutritive tonic. And a lot of people don't know what a tonic herb is, but let's get into that because I love tonic herbs. And in pretty much every culture, I've talked about this before on the show, other than maybe the American culture, there are these like traditional tonic herbs that are very, very heavily used across the population in so many places. Ginseng throughout Asia, green tea, particularly in Japan, but also in other areas of the world. I've talked about suma in Brazil and things like that. These are herbs that have some really, really universal benefit, is probably the best way to put it. A tonic in herbal medicine is an herb that nourishes and strengthens the body over time through regular use. So you could almost look at it like like a multivitamin or something like that. It's not something that produces a dramatic acute effect generally, but something that raises your baseline of overall health. It feeds systems rather than forcing them into a particular direction. Moringa fits this definition really well, too. In fact, maybe one of the best fits because it is so nutrient dense that some people actually call it a multivitamin. It's not an adaptogen. It's also not a stimulant. It's not sedative either. It doesn't modulate your cortisol axis the way that ashwagandha does. It works through a much broader mechanism, delivering a wide spectrum of bioactive compounds that collectively support the body in multiple systems at once. The primary compound families that are found in the leaf are known as isothiocyanates, saponins, flavonoids like quercetin, and phenolic acids. There's also a plant sterol called beta-sitosterol, which I think is part of the reason it plays a role in cholesterol and lipid. And again, I'll talk about that in a moment. Moringa also contains zeatin, a natural plant cytokinin, and then there's the raw nutritional density that I talked about, which is legitimately exceptional, really. Like one of the most powerful, deep, nutritious foods on the planet. Now let's talk about the history of use, and then we'll get into what we're doing with it in modern days. Moringa has been used as both food and medicine for at least 4,000 years in the Ayurvedic tradition in India. That's ancient Indian medicine that's still used today in India, and it has started to take a little bit of a foothold here in America as well. It was called shigru and was used for energy, strength, inflammation, and nutritional support. Different parts of the tree were used for different things: leaves for vitality and anti-inflammatory support, seeds for water purification, interestingly enough, which has actually been scientifically validated that it does that, and roots for circulatory support, flowers for female reproductive health, and in many other types of traditional preparations. What's striking about moringa's history is that it wasn't just South Asia. Ancient Egyptian, Greek, and Roman physicians documented it. Egyptian women used the seed oil cosmetically. Roman soldiers reportedly used moringa leaf preparations to help maintain energy on campaigns. In East Africa and sub-Saharan Africa, it's been a staple food and medicinal plant for generations, used to address malnutrition, support nursing mothers, manage blood sugar, treat infection, and so on. The World Health Organization has actually recognized moringa as a tool for fighting malnutrition in developing regions. That's not a marketing thing. That's a humanitarian acknowledgement of what this plant actually delivers nutritionally. Because maybe you know this as well as I do, the World Health Organization doesn't usually tout herbs all that much. But this herb is a true superfood that happens to also have some kind of herbal type benefits. In the Western supplement world, though, what most people are doing with moringa is a dried leaf or an extracted concentrated leaf. And it's been primarily used as a smoothie add-in. That's what I hear about it the most. We actually sell as much moringa powder as we do capsules. People throw it in like you do a greens drink or something like that. And there's nothing wrong with that. But I think that really undersells the power of this food. The research has developed significantly since it first came across to the US, and we now have human trials on blood sugar, cholesterol, blood pressure, and inflammation. Much of it has been conducted outside the US, in Nigeria, India, Spain, Latin America. But these are legitimate studies and real and peer-reviewed, and I want to walk you through the actual designs of the studies rather than just the headlines, because in this case, the details of these studies matter. Now, before I get into the actual mechanisms for this product, I want to talk a little bit about the difference between moringa versus, say, barley grass and wheatgrass and things like that I talked about. I've talked on this show a lot, and maybe you've heard it from other places as well, that optimally, if you're doing like a barley grass preparation or a wheatgrass preparation, or any kind of these super green food preparations, you basically want one of two things or both. You want the barley grass or wheatgrass to be juiced so that you're actually getting the juice of the grass as opposed to just the fiber, because it's very difficult for the human digestive tract to break down the cell walls of these grasses. And so either juiced or fermented or both is what you're typically looking for. And that's really important when you're looking at the grasses. But that's not the case with moringa. It's a broadleaf plant, not a grass. And that issue just simply doesn't apply here. So just the dried leaf is actually very, very effective, easy for the human digestive system to handle. And so when you're looking at your moringa supplements, and I'll talk a little bit more about what to look for in a supplement, dried leaf is fine. Whereas dried grass with barley grass and wheatgrass, I think you're missing the boat to some degree on that one. As far as how much to take, human trials are typically done on about 1,500 to 3,000 milligrams a day for therapeutic effects. A lot of people just take 500 to 1,000 milligrams a day for just general well-being to get those micronutrients and things like that. So what does the evidence actually tell us about moringa? Let's talk about blood sugar first. This is moringa's most studied area, and the results are pretty interesting. A randomized controlled trial from 2021 looked at people with pre-diabetes, not full diabetes, but heading that direction, and gave them about 2,400 milligrams of moringa leaf powder per day for 12 weeks versus a placebo. The moringa group showed favorable changes in both fasting blood glucose and HbA1c. And I want to emphasize HbA1c because this is the 3-month average blood sugar measurement. This is what basically creates the diagnosis for diabetes. These pre-diabetic people were in the mid-5s probably, and it takes time for this one to move. I talked about in my GLP-1 episodes that I have encouraged people to use the GLP-1 formula for 3 months, because one of the big things you want to see is that HbA1c level move, and it does take a few months for that to happen. But these were 3-month tests. And what they found was a significant reduction in fasting blood glucose and A1C. So really cool, meaningful signals there. A more recent double-blind placebo-controlled trial that was just published last year in 2025 looked at people with metabolic syndrome, elevated blood sugar, elevated blood pressure, abnormal lipid levels, increased waist circumference, and gave them 2,000 milligrams of moringa leaf extract per day for 8 weeks. The Moringa group saw a reduction in A1C of about 0.4%. Over 8 weeks, that's a really, really impressive number. Over 12 weeks, 16 weeks, 32 weeks, that should consistently go down, at least it would seem. And that, considering just taking 2,000 milligrams a day of a superfood can help with that. Really impressive. They also saw a reduction in fasting insulin levels and a decrease in both systolic and diastolic blood pressure. So blood pressure, blood sugar, and A1C all coming down over an 8-week period. Body weight in 8 weeks did not change significantly, which tells you that the metabolic improvements weren't just driven by weight loss. They were actual kind of, off the scale, we'll say, reductions in these areas. Now, I don't know that moringa, based on what I've read anyway, I haven't seen significant evidence that moringa would help with appetite suppression or things like that. So likely people were eating and consuming, relatively similar diets to what they were prior to the study, which actually makes it even more impressive to me. Mechanically, moringa's compounds appear to support insulin signaling in multiple ways, supporting healthy enzyme activity and glucose metabolism in the liver, potentially inhibiting intestinal glucose uptake and supporting glucose uptake in the muscle tissue. The flavonoids, particularly quercetin and chlorogenic acid, contributed as well, according to the studies. Now, let's talk about that cholesterol thing. A clinical trial published in 2023 found that moringa supplementation over 8 weeks in people with elevated cholesterol produced approximately an 11% reduction in LDL and about a 9% reduction in total cholesterol. So let's just say, for instance, that your cholesterol, your LDL cholesterol is 180. 11% is going to take that down significantly, right? About 18 points, 20 points, somewhere in that range. But what I like about this study and what encourages me about it is I'm not a big believer in these cholesterol numbers. I do believe that we need higher levels of HDL than most of us have, a better LDL to HDL ratio. But the thing that I love about this study is 11% reduction in LDL and a 9% reduction in total cholesterol. What that means is that the numbers actually, the ratio improved. LDL was coming down, HDL would have been coming up a little bit in order for those numbers to make sense. 11% reduction in LDL, but only a 9% reduction in total cholesterol. That's what we want. We want a better cholesterol ratio. We're more concerned about that than we are the overall number. So this is one area where I'm going to say that, taking something that can help your cholesterol would actually be helping your health, not just lowering a number that many doctors are concerned about. Now, in 2025, there was a review in Frontiers in Pharmacology that analyzed 26 separate systematic reviews covering Moringa and inflammatory conditions. So 26 different studies. The conclusion was that Moringa acts on inflammation through NF-κB and NRF2 pathways. Those are two of the most fundamental regulatory systems for inflammation in the human body. Reduction in C-reactive protein was observed across multiple studies. What's notable here is that Moringa doesn't appear to just deliver dietary antioxidant. It appears to upregulate the body's own antioxidant enzyme systems through NRF2. That is awesome. Actually helping the body do what it's supposed to do from an antioxidant and anti-inflammatory benefit. So you're getting both direct activity from the plant's compounds and a boost to your own internal defense systems. So for someone with chronic low-grade inflammation, which describes a very large portion of the American population, remember 85% of disease in America is estimated to be inflammatory in nature, this is a genuinely relevant result. Very, very cool. And that's something I'd never read about Moringa before until I started prepping this show. Now, there are some lesser known uses that are still really cool. Well, actually, the probably the most well-known use is just, like I say, adding it to a smoothie. And let's talk about that, because by dry weight, it has significantly more beta carotene than carrots, more vitamin C than oranges, more calcium than milk, more potassium than bananas, and more iron than spinach by a wide margin, along with a more complete amino acid profile than you would expect from a plant. Now, by dry weight is a qualifier because Moringa powder is concentrated, but even accounting for that, the nutrient profile is exceptional. Like, there are very few superfoods as super as Moringa. For someone not getting adequate greens, not getting enough micronutrients, which is honestly most people listening to this show probably, Moringa is one of the most nutritionally efficient supplements that you can take. Not a replacement for a whole food diet, of course, but a real and meaningful way to fill the gaps. Now, one of the lesser known uses that I was excited about, because I did not know about this one until I started studying for this as well, Moringa is great for lactation support. So if you're a nursing mother, it has long historical use in Indian culture, and now in Western supplement circles, it's being discussed a lot. Moringa has been used across South Asia and Africa for centuries to support milk production in nursing mothers. Now, we have often used things like brewer's yeast in America, higher protein diets, herbs like blessed thistle or fenugreek. All of these can still be very useful, but Moringa, I think probably largely because of the extremely dense nature of the nutrient profile in there and filling the gaps in a nursing mom's diet, can be very, very effective. The mechanism, they believe, beyond just the nutrient density, though, is that they think that Moringa influences prolactin, the hormone that actually drives milk production. This isn't actually fringe either. There's really well-documented benefits in human studies, lots of human data on this that, again, had slipped past me. I hadn't seen that before. So very cool. Cellular health is one that you maybe have heard about. And this is one that, supplement companies have to be very careful. I have to be very careful because some of you have heard of Moringa discussed in cancer circles. And I want to give you an honest picture of where that conversation actually stands. The short answer is the research here is real, it is interesting, and it is entirely preclinical, meaning cell studies and animal models, no human trials yet. So what we do know, though, is that there are two compounds that have generated significant research interest in the context of cellular health. Niazimicin, which is a compound fairly unique to moringa, and something called MIC1, which is the primary isothiocyanate in moringa leaves. In cell studies, these compounds have shown the ability to inhibit abnormal cell proliferation, trigger apoptosis, the death of cells that we want to get rid of, and suppress the NF-κB signaling pathway, which we already talked about in the inflammation section. In animal studies, niazimicin specifically has shown the ability to inhibit tumor promotion. Now, if any of this is sounding familiar, and it should, if you know anything about sulforaphane from broccoli, that has generated enormous interest in functional medicine circles, moringa's isothiocyanates are working through very similar mechanisms as does the sulforaphane in broccoli. The same class of compounds, overlapping pathways. That doesn't mean they're interchangeable, but it does tell you why researchers are paying attention. So while we don't have human clinical trials, there's enough supporting evidence to believe that there's probably some real meat on this bone when it comes to cellular health and helping with people that are concerned about cancer prevention and natural things they can do to help supplement their body when they're dealing with cancer. So very, very cool stuff in all of those categories. Now, in these extraordinary herbs episodes, I always like to give you smart stacks and kind of practical how-tos. How can we actually utilize this herb or this plant more effectively? First off, let's talk about dosing. For the whole leaf capsules, therapeutic doses, as I mentioned at the top, in human studies have ranged from about 1,500 to 3,000 milligrams per day. The studies that I mentioned earlier were 2,000 to 2,400 milligrams. Most capsules on the market are 400 to 600 milligrams per capsule. So you're typically looking at 3 to 6 capsules per day for a therapeutic dose. For general nutritional support, rather than a specific goal, 1 or 2 capsules is a reasonable maintenance approach. For powder, 1 or 2 teaspoons per day covers most therapeutic ranges. You can blend it into something strongly flavored because it does have a taste that's a bit assertive, we'll say. And you may want to start a little bit slow. Some people have a little bit of mild digestive discomfort the first few days that they take moringa while their body's getting used to it. But as a general rule, that goes away very quickly and resolves itself. If blood sugar support is your primary goal, then you should take it with meals because that is when the mechanism seems to be the most relevant. So my top stacks with moringa are moringa and anything that you're using for blood sugar or A1C. Berberine would be the most obvious single choice because the berberine is going to work through the AMPK activation. Moringa works through the insulin signaling pathways and intestinal glucose absorption, different mechanisms, complementary effects. Now, I don't have moringa in the new GLP-1 metabolic optimizer formula because, as I stated, the doses are very high in terms of milligrams, 1,500 to 3,000 milligrams, which would make the GLP-1 formula at least 6 capsules a day instead of 3 capsules a day. But if you're using the GLP-1 formula and you like it and you want even additional support, especially if you're, in diabetes or edging close to that, feel like you've got a lot of insulin resistance, things like that, moringa does have some really unique properties that I think make it a nice addition to the GLP-1 formula or any other blood sugar balancing herbal or mineral, preparations like chromium, things like that. If you're concerned about this low grade inflammation stuff, chronic inflammatory things, which I'm working on myself. And, it's interesting because I do these shows and I do them for you, the listener. And oftentimes at the end of the show, I'm like, once I've prepared it, I'm like, maybe I need to try this stuff because I've never used moringa on a regular basis. So we may be stacking this myself to help with some inflammatory stuff and maybe even help the GLP-1 work even better. And I have promised this, and I'm going to say it now. I'm not exactly sure when this show is going to air, but I do want you to know a couple of things really quick. We'll just take a quick break from moringa and then jump back into it. The show is finally going to be on YouTube. I've had 1 million people ask me for it on YouTube. It's finally happening. So that's going to happen. In fact, by the time this show airs, it will be a YouTube show as well as, of course, all the podcasts, areas that it's always been, Apple and Spotify and that kind of thing. Love to see you over there at YouTube checking this out. But also, because I'm not sure exactly when this is coming out. I don't know what the time frame is, so I'll tell you as I'm recording it where we're at. It's April 27th. GLP-1 Metabolic Optimizer came out on March 29th, so we're pretty close to the 30-day mark. And I want to give you a little update on my what's happening with me and also what's happening with my wife. So interestingly enough, Jen has been, like so many of you women in the audience, fighting that perimenopause, menopause weight gain that has popped in there. And even though she's done a lot of things for hormone balancing and she's done some things to really take care of any of the hot flashes or things like that, she has struggled with some of that extra weight around the waist. Well, about 29 days in, I guess it is, we have 10 pounds that she's lost since she's been on the GLP-1 metabolic optimizer. She's found her sugar cravings are much lower. I have been on it that entire time as well. And I've already reported in another episode that I'd lost, I think in that episode, I said it was 8.5 pounds. I can't remember. And that was after like 19 days or something like that. I'm tracking all of it, but I don't remember exactly what day it was that I reported to you on this show. But I hit a plateau for about a week after that, where I actually gained about a pound and then just hung out there for a while. But as of today, I'm back down that pound plus another 1.2. So I'm almost up to 10 pounds, almost caught up to Jen here. Not exactly sure what went on exactly. I have to assume, well, I have some thoughts. I think it had to do with fairly high amount of cortisol for about a week or so. There was a lot of stress going on with the new store opening and with us moving into our new house and with Be Healthy Utah and prepping for that and all that stuff. And I just think that, yeah, things just slowed down. My body was like, too much stress. Let's not do anything right now. But we're back into the groove. I'm still loving what it's doing for my blood sugar. I'm still loving what it's doing for sugar cravings. So just my little update for you there. And then I will tell you that the other thing, because I just talked about stress and cortisol, that is a great stack with Moringa is ashwagandha. Particularly, of course, my favorite is sensory ashwagandha. I love that stuff. And ashwagandha handles stress on the cortisol axis, adrenal resilience, hormone balance. Moringa handles the nutritional and antioxidant layer. And so for stress-related fatigue, where the depletion has both a hormonal component and a nutritional component, this combination makes a lot of sense. So there's a lot of reasons why Moringa actually makes sense for me right now, interestingly. So if I do decide to try it, I will let you know and see how things go. Moringa is generally very well tolerated. It's really considered more of a superfood than an herb and more of a tonic herb. So it's not something to be concerned about, taking with other medications or things like that, other than blood sugar medications. And anything that you're doing for blood sugar, you want to watch it because Moringa can bring blood sugar down. And of course, blood sugar can come too low. So you have to keep an eye on that, especially if you're insulin dependent, that kind of thing. But other than that, it's generally considered quite safe. They do recommend that if you have a thyroid condition, particularly an autoimmune thyroid condition, that you at least discuss with your practitioner before using Moringa, but generally speaking, would be considered safe for most people. Now, how do you find out if you've got a good Moringa supplement? Well, there's a few things you want to look for. Again, you're looking for the leaf, and you can get it in powder, you can get it in capsules, and you can get extracts, or you can get whole leaf. We carry 4 different Moringas at Vitality Nutrition right now from 4 brands that I trust. Organic India, The Food Movement are the 2 powders that we have. Love both of those brands. They're fantastic. They source beautiful stuff. And they're 2 of my favorite brands, especially when it comes to Ayurvedic herb. Organic India is fantastic there. Food Movement does not do a wide range of Ayurvedic herbs, but they are very, very careful on the sourcing, and I love their stuff as well. Both of them have an organic Moringa powder that I absolutely trust and believe are really, really good. We also have one called Yerba Prima. Yerba Prima comes in a capsule, and this is just dried Moringa leaf in a capsule, 400 milligrams per capsule. So you're looking at, 3 or 4 capsules to get into that kind of low range of the studies, which is one of the reasons that a lot of people use the powder. But there's also an extract available from Cellular. Now, Cellular is one of my favorite brands, and they're the only Moringa extract that I've found that is standardized to the saponins in a really good percentage. 15% is the standardization. Saponins are one of the most powerful parts of the plant, so we know that it's there, and it is going to be a little more expensive per capsule. You're going to have to look at that. Actually, it's going to be about, I think it's a little more than double per capsule, but the reason for that is when you look at the actual potency of saponins in the whole leaf, this is a 15% extract, and on average, you're going to get around 2 to 3% in the whole leaf. So they're using somewhere between probably 5 and 7, 8 times as much whole herb, whole leaf to make this extract versus just the whole leaf. So you do pay for that extraction, but you're actually getting a lot of value for the money there, if that makes sense. Because per capsule, you're actually getting the equivalent of like 5 or 6 capsules of a regular whole leaf, at least in that saponins. So these are all the brands that I trust. And what you do want to look for is companies that are saying crazy things about Moringa. It's the equivalent of 10,000 milligrams. And maybe they don't even show what the standardization is or the extraction method or any of that kind of stuff. These are the types of games that are played on Amazon all the time. Be really, really careful. Just what you're looking for is either whole leaf powder from a brand that you know, or an extract that is standardized, or at least tells you 4-to-1, 5-to-1, 10-to-1 extract or something like that from a trusted brand. And that's what you want with Moringa. With the extract, I do believe you can get away with less, probably 2 capsules per day, make a lot of sense versus, like 4 to 6 capsules of a whole leaf. And if you love the idea of just throwing it in your smoothie, not adding any more capsules, then the powder is a good way to go. All right, so let's just wrap this up with a couple more things here. Moringa doesn't need to be the most like dramatic supplement you've ever taken where you take it and you're like 2 days later, oh my gosh, I feel so much better. It's a nutrient dense superfood that over time creates some really, really awesome benefits. Everything from blood sugar report, inflammation regulation, antioxidant defense, and even balancing cholesterol, not necessarily just lowering it, which I really, really love. It's got thousands of years of safe use in dozens of cultures. And for some of you, it's primarily just going to be a nutritional tool, a real and efficient way to add plant nutrition to your diet in high concentration to fill some of the gaps that you have in your diet. But for others, particularly people navigating the metabolic challenges like blood sugar, chronic inflammation, it's a meaningful therapeutic herb with actual human trials behind it. I really, really love Moringa because it just brings so much to the table. And I debated whether or not to make it an extraordinary herb on this show or in this series of shows, because I've been focusing on like really well-known stuff like ashwagandha, but I couldn't think of another place to put it. It's an extraordinary herb. Moringa, very, very cool stuff. All right, so that's all I've got for you today. I hope you enjoyed the show. I do want to remind you that we have 2 stores now if you're in Utah. One in Bountiful, the original, we're calling it the Mothership, and one in South Ogden, just north of Bountiful, which is still called Healthy Me, but will be called Vitality Nutrition very soon. Of course, we have our website, vitalitynutrition.com. And if you're a Just Ingredients fan, we have Just Ingredients in South Ogden now. It's hard to find up there from what I understand. And I'm going to be on the Just Ingredients podcast. In 2 weeks, I'll be recording with Cara Lynn in her studio. And I'm not sure when that will release, but when I know, I will let you know. So if you want to check it out, because so many of you found this show because of that show. Thank you so much for joining me. If you have any questions, call us 801-292-6662. I'm Jared St. Clair, and this has been Vitality Radio. Thanks for listening to the Vitality Radio podcast. If this episode helped you, follow the show, share it with someone, and explore trusted education and resources at vitalitynutrition.com. See you next time.
Hello, everyone. I hope you enjoyed this week's episode of Vitality Radio. Just a reminder that this podcast is for educational purposes only. This podcast has not been evaluated by the FDA. This podcast is provided with the understanding that the information shared is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease. This podcast is not a substitute for professional care by a medical professional. Thank you.